game from the US Championship between Larry Christiansem playing white and Conrad Holt playing black. So a match of youth versus experience. And this match, actually, youth triumphed because Conrad Holt found a very nice resource for black here.
Bishop A3.
Bishop A3. Interesting. Well, let's see. What are your threats? What if I take this pawn? Doesn't white create a lot of counter threats here? You might be getting mated quite soon. What do you think? Yes, looks dangerous. So you missed this queen takes f5 idea. It's one of white's main threats here.
Bishop c5 so it can attack the rook.
Why do you want to play that bishop move so eagerly? Why is moving the bishop so important?
Nice attack on his discovered attack on his queen with a check with rook to g4. They didn't end up getting mated if I did that.
Okay, so you saw that. That's very good. That was very important to see. Can you take that right there if I throw it over to you?
So I've got my attack, his counterattack. I kind of countered his counterattack. And the only thing
Yes.
that seems to do that is to get me space and attack something powerful here.
Okay, very good thinking. Well, okay, guys, so the trick in this position is that black's main idea, rook g4, which, looks like it wins a queen due to this discovered attack, unfortunately doesn't, because white can simply capture the rook, and on queen f3, everything would be nice here for black, except the combination of the knight and the rook leads to checkmate. So suddenly white turns the tables and wins the game. So that is the #1 problem with the move rook g4. So black, of course, noticing that, he decided to circumvent that problem by playing the move bishop c5. Super strong move, yes, and it's more powerful than bishop a3 because the attack is on the rook rather than just some pawn. I mean, it's a nice pawn to take, right? But after this move, unfortunately, there are many ways that we are being threatened with mate, so I think white's counterplay is very strong here. That's the downside of having your king not sheltered by any pawns. But bishop c5 attacks the rook, so on this move, I think you just take here, and white does not even have any checks, any good checks. And black is simply up a rook. And if he takes the bishop, then you carry out this idea. You've cleared the f8 square for the king, and your king is going to be able to escape from checks here. Sometimes the rook and the knight, like in this type of formation, actually can deliver a perpetual check, but not in this position. The knight goes here, king goes here, knight goes here. Of course, you're not going to go back. You're going to go this way, and the most white can do is give you checks this way, and then the checks end. So that's the most that the rook and the knight can accomplish together, and then the queen is going to have its say. We can actually see a few more moves of how the game went. Larry did not just give up so easily. On bishop g, by the way, bishop c5, very important that white cannot move away the rook with check, right? That square is controlled by the queen. So he played d5. Good try. Actually, the only move that actually saves the queen, right, by blocking that diagonal. d5, queen e8. And the point is, again, white has no time to take that pawn because the rook is hanging. Queen e8, rook c7, rook f4. And black is able to go on the attack here because white's king is also not so safe. Rook f4, queen h3. I'm not sure if he won in the cleanest way, but it seems to have been pretty good. Queen takes e3, rook e4. And in this position, the threats of rook e1 and queen e4 are, what he's trying to do. So queen here, this move is important because you need someone guarding the e4 square. Otherwise, rook e1 and queen e4 would have just been mates, so you need the queen guarding that square. Queen e5. And black is going to win because of all these extra pawns that he has. And the attack on the king. Queen e5, d6, queen d6, rook c8, king g7, queen f5. And how did black win the game here? So look at all forcing moves. That's always the characteristic of a good technique, good calculating technique. Look at all forcing moves. The most forcing kinds of moves are checks. Yes, you've got two checks here, one by the rook, one by the queen, but if you start with the rook, then you quickly run out of checks, right? After king g2, there's no square here, there's no square here, so black's attack has sort of reached a dead end. But if you start this way, and the king goes here, how can you follow it up? Right, rook g4, let's say king h3. Rook h4, let's say king g3. Yeah, at least. That's right, this is good enough. If you see that you can win your opponent's queen, then it's a good enough moment to stop calculation. So I just thought this was a pretty attractive example on how, you have to sort of notice your opponent's main ideas, right? You have to notice why rook g4 doesn't work, and then the next step is to figure out what kind of move could renew this idea, right? It's important in chess not to actually give up on your ideas, but to figure out how to make them work. So if black, just saw this, saw that it was, refuted, and gave up, he probably
Virus database has been updated.
probably wouldn't have won this game. But black was very persistent in figuring out a way to actually bring this idea to life on the board. So now I'm going to give you an example that is a sort of a follow-up of an example that I showed you last night. So just briefly, I'm going to show you the position. So does this position look familiar to you guys? We spent quite a bit of time on it yesterday. This endgame that arose in the game Stripunksy Bartel in the US Chess League on Tuesday night. Do you guys remember? People who were here at least? Yes. So for the people who were here, who can explain to us what were the important points from this endgame? What did we learn from it?
You want to fix black's pawns and dark squares.
Right. So in bishop endgames, it's very important to be able to fix pawns on the same color square, let's say as your opponent's bishop and also as your bishop, because then they're a target for your bishop to attack. So that is like a very powerful strategy. Because in an endgame, right, pawn structure takes on greater significance. There are fewer pieces, so ideas like mating attacks and combinations, they kind of go down in frequency. And what becomes, more important in frequency is simple things like pawn structure. What's the placement, what's the location of my pawns? Are they weak? Can they be attacked and captured, right? So in an endgame of this type, the pawn structure is extremely important. If you can make targets of your opponent's pawns, then that's already like a ready-made plan for you, right? You have targets, then you can attack them, you can win them, you can win the game, right? So this pawn, can this pawn be a target for white's bishop? No, right? So it's good for black, for example, to have these pawns on light squares where this bishop can never touch them. Right now, black has 2 pawns on dark squares. Doesn't seem like such a big problem yet. I mean, obviously I can't just capture that pawn. And attacking it either doesn't seem like such a big deal because it can, advance. And if you attack it again, I can advance again and actually be implementing the strategy of putting all my pawns on light squares where your bishop can't attack them. So it doesn't seem like such a big problem for black here. However, black in this, very soon, black made a very important mistake. Well, first he made a normal move. He moved his king to the center. Actually, let me just change this to black to move. He moved his king to the center. We can't argue with that strategy. White pushed the pawn to b5. So white is trying to create a passed pawn on the queen side. There was a trade. And at this moment, black made this really incomprehensible move, bishop to f8. So instead of, moving his king around here, close to the pawn, he made this move. And this was a big mistake because it lost control over the square and gave white the chance to play here, right? So it looks like a small detail. Sorry for the people who saw this. I'm reiterating this point, but this will be important for our next example. So now black cannot actually avoid this type of structure. He cannot get both pawns on light squares anymore. He tried. He made this move, but white did not give him time to advance. White advanced himself, and he was able to fix a target. So in a position like this, these kinds of little details are actually, what the position is all about. There's nothing else going on here except, hey, are there targets that I can attack, right? So white is thrilled to have a fixed target on h6, and in fact, white won the game ultimately by, trading both of these pawns for both of these pawns and winning the h6 pawn. I can actually show you approximately how the game ended. Right, so this was the position. I can set it up for you. White's made some progress, but it wasn't because black was really making any big mistakes. White played b6, king b7, and f3. f3. By the way, always a good strategy, putting your pawns on a color that your opponent cannot attack it with his bishop. Actually, there is a deeper point to the move f3 than simply that. f3. Now what should black do? Let's consider a move for him. Bishop e3. Well, unfortunately, that gives my king this nice square, and it starts approaching your pawns. You can win this pawn, but your king is not in a very good spot. I'm already threatening all of your pawns, right, to win very quickly. So, I don't know, that obviously has a drawback, right?
E6.
Which one?
E6. I'm sorry, on E6.
The pawn is already e5. Yeah, this is what black wound up doing. But I just wanted to stop at this moment because what happened is with the move f3, white puts black in something called what? Zugzwang. Black actually would rather make no move at all, right? Over here, I mean, think about it. His king is fine. His bishop is doing the maximum he could be doing in this position, which is A, protecting that pawn, and B, protecting that invasion square, right? So the bishop is perfect. And the pawns, they don't want to move either because they are preventing this king from advancing towards them, right? So black would like to pass a move, but white has put him in Zugzwang with the move f3. Black has to make a move, and yes, he played the move e5. He chose to advance his pawn. Okay. Well, there's a drawback to the move e5, and what is that? Which one? Yeah, king that goes and starts approaching the pawns. Well, obviously now this pawn is threatened, also this pawn is threatened, so black tried to trade off as many of them as possible before losing them all. Right, so there was a trade, a trade, a trade. Wow, there's not much material left, right? So you might think, hey, how could black possibly lose this? He just wins this pawn And look, there's barely anything left on the board. Oh, sorry, well, no, he moved his bishop away before. Yes, there was also that little problem. Okay, king moved here. And let me see, how was it? Oh, he moved to g5, just to be accurate, so that I don't just make up the game for you. Even though I was tempted at this point just to like make up some moves to illustrate how it went. Bishop g5 is what actually happened. Okay. First of all, white even just defended that pawn, so there's no reason to lose it right away. King c6. Then he moved his king in, closer to the h6 pawn. Bishop d2. King g6. Bishop c1. Bishop to g7. King takes. Bishop here. And how does white win this endgame?
Move his bishop to g7.
Okay, yeah, that's a good start. Obviously, I don't want to trade, and I should be moving here.
G5 is better, right?
Which one?
G5.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the main thing, of course, like I'm going to be stopping your pawns in the dark squares, right, from advancing because I want to sacrifice my bishop for it and make a draw. So yeah, I mean, this move was, I think, the more accurate move. And the idea is I'm keeping my bishop on this diagonal to allow my pawn to first advance. And after I advance it, right, so let's say you play here, I'm first going to advance my pawn, and then you get here. And then I get you off this diagonal. When it's too late for you to actually be stopping my pawn from advancing there, then by the time you go here, then it's too late because I get off that square and I promote my pawn. So we get the idea, right, of how, with very limited material on the board, white won this endgame because he had a fixed target, h6. That's one little thing won the game for white. Okay, so now I saw another interesting example today on this theme. So earlier on in this game, white had sacrificed a pawn, to have the advantage of the bishop pair and to have the initiative. And it seems like, he made the correct decision because obviously, white is obviously having a lot of initiative for the pawn deficit, and it's his move, and he can even win it back. So, well, why don't you think for a moment here and tell me, what you think is the best move for white and why? Very good. So, I mean, I'm sure a lot of players, would jump at the chance to win this pawn, right? Win the pawn back and restore the material. And they wouldn't really even consider, stop to consider anything else at this point. But of course, white, he's a, experienced grandmaster. So he, as much as he values material, he knows that this pawn is not going anywhere. And he was looking around to see if more useful moves exist for white. And he found the move c4, which is the only move that actually establishes white's advantage in this endgame. Right? Now, positionally speaking, now we understand why such a move is useful for white, right? He's got a dark squared bishop. You're putting the pawn on the light square, fixing that pawn on a dark square, keeping this bishop passive. And next move, you can win this pawn and, play your better endgame, right? But what would happen, let's say, if you didn't do that? I mean, let's say you play rook takes b7. So what? I mean, you'll just play c4 next move. What would black do here, guys? That's a question for you. You can think about it. What are you saying?
Play c4 instead.
Right. Black would actually have the opportunity for that move, and that is the only move that really gives black good counter chances. You've got to try to look for active moves in chess. You don't want to have pieces like this on b6, right? Bishop staring into its own pawns like a big pawn. It's not so good. So c4, open up the bishop. And how can white, do anything here? I mean, let's try to play a few moves here just to see. Maybe you know, maybe white can get some sort of advantage based on his active rook, and these pawns are still a bit weak, right? Well, for example, you know, in chess we should always look at the most forcing moves first, right? So what's going to happen if we make this trade? So black has a choice, right? And as I was talking about in my last couple of lectures, one of the big themes was to always be careful about going into a pure king and pawn endgame, right? Because you don't know. I mean, yeah, you can trade rooks, very nice, but maybe you're just losing. So think about that for a minute, just to make sure that that's really what you want to do, or maybe you'd rather be playing the rook endgame. So you think it's okay? Yes, you're not afraid. That's correct. Yes. But still, you know, I just wanted to stop there for a moment, just, you know, to reinforce the idea again how big of a decision that is. Obviously, white doesn't have that much choice about the trade, because if he doesn't, then the b2 pawn hangs, and, you know, black is going to be having a lot of counterplay in this position. So this is not a problem. This rook endgame is not a problem for black. So the most likely thing that's going to happen is that we're going to be trading AB. Now, the only thing that would be a little worrisome here, you know, for white, is that white has a pawn majority on the queen side of 3-on-2, right? So it really should be easier for him to create a passed pawn than for black, where there are more pawns over here, right? And I would worry about white having the opportunity to get an outside passed pawn. So you guys all familiar with this theme? Right? Like if white is able to get an outside passed pawn here, you know, maybe like some, I don't know, C pawn, and then kind of use it as a deflection against this king, get this king to the C file, this king will be on the E file, maybe white can win. But in this position, it turns out not to be really dangerous for black, because these pawns are going to be too close over here, and let's say you even do something like that, white's king is also not able to get active. So you can actually put your king very actively, and this is not enough of an outside passed pawn for white to win. White's king is not able to get to these pawns. Also, these pawns give black a nice space advantage. So black does not have anything to worry about in this particular king and pawn endgame. But, you know, like I said, I wouldn't just automatically go for it, because, you know, I recognize that there's some potential danger in a position where my opponent has an opportunity to more easily create a passed pawn than I do. And I'm always thinking, you know, well, can white get a dangerous outside passed pawn here? But here it doesn't seem to be the case. So definitely in that case, there's no drawback to going into a pure king and pawn endgame. In fact, you might have more problems if you keep the rooks on the board. Because what is, yes, white is going to play rook c7, start attacking the c4 pawn, and b5, and rook here, double attack on these two pawns. And, you know, white is using the activity of the rook. So white, you know, black really is in some trouble here. Wouldn't want to play this type of rook endgame for black. So yeah, basically, and what else after the move c4? Can white do anything else? Well, we're threatening to maybe play rook b6 ourselves. Doesn't seem like there's a lot white can do, you know. So the move c4 gives black pretty decent counterplay. Do you guys agree with that? Yes? So that's why you've got to be, it's nice to be a subtle chess player, not be in too much of a hurry, and to appreciate the value of fixing your opponent's pawns on the same color square as his bishop, also just making the bishop a very passive piece. I'm not saying like, black is losing here. In fact, black even drew this game later on, but for sure, he had to suffer after the move c4.